in terms of process or the service gaps? Is there anybody who'd like to sort of reflect on that or share? Because this is one of the part of the problems, right? So you'll have academics say their things, and then, there's a bridging exercise, and part of the conversation has to be had with people who are on the ground and delivering. And it's really rare to have an opportunity. And so we're really hoping that you'll engage and, sort of help us complete the picture. Niru, yes?
I actually have a question. I don't have an answer to your question. Related to, the points that both of you made about sharing of information among the frontline and the service providers. I have two questions. One is related to your study. What is the first port of call for most of these victims? Is it the police? Is it the social workers? Is it an NGO? And the second question is, and particularly for ethnic minority women, and the second question is, how many of the cases where the police were called in, did a social worker or somebody else have knowledge of the issue? Do you have any findings from your research on this?
So I think it's a fallacy to think of it as the cases being that a victim would have one place as a port of call, because as we know, it depends on how you're situated and located in your context, where you will turn to when you need help. And as I said, a lot of these women were first turning to their friends and community, and only after experiencing several years of violence, when it got extreme, did they reach out. But a lot of these cases came out of general approaches made to community service providers on education or some form of retraining, or sort of taking the kids to tutorial classes in service providers for ethnic minorities, where the violence later came to light. So none of them, in fact, were dedicated shelters providing services to victims of domestic violence, except one. So that's sort of the one instance in which the woman knew exactly where to go. They do call on police if they're that desperate. But again, the cases are few and far between, because when they have had an experience and they call the police, their first encounter was not positive, and so after that they gave up, and then sort of the violence resurfaced several years later when they were working with people. As I also mentioned in the slide, none of them talked about violence when they went to the hospital to receive treatment for their injuries, and they were not asked, how did you get these injuries? There was no suspicion. So clearly there's the sense that, well, if she had this problem, she would say something. And I want to say, well, we need to debunk that. I don't think that's the reality. And the second thing is, clearly, if she had a problem, she would know where to go. No, she may not know where to go. And then clearly, if she had a problem, this is the place she should go. That may not be the place she will go. And so, in fact, at the 5th seminar in Melbourne, one of the primary sort of themes that came out of discussion was this concept of the no wrong door policy. And I think that's sort of emerging out of our discussion here, where all of us need to know what advice to give, even though that's not our job. And as Edward said, we won't be handling the case of domestic violence, but we need to know where to send these women to so that they can reliably be dealt with and have all their concerns addressed and be protected against risk of future violence. So that's called the no wrong door policy. So no matter where you show up, whether it comes through at school or at the hospital, people know what to do and tell you the right thing to do. So again, addressing also what Esther said, nobody should be in a situation where you say, oh, I don't know what to do, maybe I'll call up so-and-so. So a reliable source of consistent messages and information. And I think all of it needs to come down to the message that we have a zero tolerance policy for violence. Yes.
So probably as a frontline service provider, we can share some of our experience. Me and my colleague Jessica is from NGO Pathfinders, and we help migrant workers who are pregnant or have children born in Hong Kong. Some of them experience domestic violence, and the some of the situation that we face is we had one client that she was facing the violent situation, and the shelter she we refer her to stay in a domestic violence shelter, and then she found it really inconvenient. The school that the children are going is far away from the shelter. She doesn't have money to do the transportation. We pay for the allowance, but without our intervention, how would she be able to go into that shelter? And also, the shelter do provide cooking materials that she can cook her own food, but then the food are very Chinese food, but then she doesn't, the type of food that she's eating, she's not eating pork, she's eating a certain food, and in different time as the Chinese. So it made her feel very inconvenient, that she ultimately decided to go back to the family and stay with the husband. That's one issue. And the domestic violence shelter do provide counseling, very good counseling for probably local women, but then because of the cultural issue and language, that agency cannot provide counseling to our client, and we are not specialized in domestic violence, so it would be quite difficult and challenging for our social worker to step into that place and provide family type counseling as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, and also we also experience that shelter request our clients to go to IFSC before go to the shelter. They said they do not really take care of the case for long term, so they need someone to actually handle this DV case before they can take the case. They worry a lot of no one take care of the case. Yes, some migrant workers, they are out of the services. And so, what to do? And it is so difficult for them. So I really feel they don't have sensibility. My clients find it super difficult that you limit myself, not bringing my children to the kitchen. Who take care of my children then? So how? So it is so difficult. They only suggest that you buy your own food, and she doesn't have money. She only have food coupon.
Yeah, well, this is very reflective of some of the things that were emerging out of these interviews as well, that shelters would not even be sensitive to dietary requirements and say, well, you should be glad we're giving you food. And so if it's beef or pork or whatever it may be, this is what it is. And I think what Jessica just said about, well, if you don't like it, you can buy your own food. I mean, again, the insensitivity there is just, very, very glaring. But also, I think going back to what you said, that you would pass the buck sometimes. And this is something that ethnic minority and immigrant women often face because their situation is so uncertain. Not only do they not know what their immigration status means for everybody, but even service providers have this big question mark of where in the system do they fit? Who do they go to? And so you'll be sent to the Integrated Family Services Center, who will say, well, you can go to this shelter. And then the shelter says, well, you can only stay here for a limited period of time. Or you have 4 children, we have no room for all of you. So maybe I'll find you somewhere else. And after this ping pong rally, which is literally what it is, I mean, one of the women I interviewed had on a 24-hour period visited seven different agencies that she was told could help her, and eventually went back to the abuser because none of them were able to take her in. So there is this sense of, well, where do you fit? And that's part of the problem. We are designed to put people somewhere, and we fail to think about, well, there needs to be a better system to map out taking care of their needs. And is there a way to park them somewhere first? Take care of their safety first. And then, of course, deal with, I know there are institutional and system issues that need to be addressed, but it's this is not my job, this is not my role, we can't help you, maybe so-and-so can. That's a lot of the messages that the women are getting. So it's not surprising to me that many of the high-risk repeat violence victims are choosing to go back to the perpetrators.
If I may add, that's why the lawyers are very practical in these matters. If I may ask, somebody comes to me like that, and I will tell them, let's file for divorce, let's get your interim monthly allowances, and let's make sure your husband cannot step into the matrimonial home.
A lot of these women don't have money, don't qualify for legal aid for some reason. I mean, the majority
No, you are qualified for legal aid if you cannot afford anything.
Yeah, But I'm a social worker. I really appreciate the question that how much training do we have? We don't really know much about the legal side, and I don't know whether we have social welfare department representative here to discuss the issue.
This is so one who signed up. I'm not sure if they're here, but I'll leave them to self-identify.
Okay, that's good. I appreciate. And yes, I didn't know about injunction order after I finally aware from other colleagues' case. Okay, that is injunction order. So really, I think it is important to train at least social workers if we believe we are the first person, very often, to deal with the case. So I hope, the multidisciplinary training, something like that, can be more often and open to even graduates. That would be very good.
Yes, sure. Thank you. I'm social worker too, and one of the service provider in the NGOs. Our is a crisis center to deal with domestic victims, sexual abuse, just like. One point I want to share is I agree with the speaker that the cultural sensitivity is very important, because from day one I work in my center. Maybe I need more to equip myself, and through the working experience, I realized that we need to aware every moment when I encounter different race, maybe sexual orientation, different types of people, so that I think the training in the university is important, but the more important is that in-job training and share with different discipline and colleagues is more important in the on-job training, because we need to improve ourselves. Just one example in our agency is maybe in the early stage we did not well, but we realized that the ethnic minorities women cannot eat pork. We need to separate. We separate kind of cooking utilities for them, cook the halal food, and in the community there are some food banks for them to buy their food, just suitable for them. So I think we need more platform to share what the practice wisdom. Maybe it's little, small step, but it's very important. Another I want to feedback is that the injunction order, it is very difficult for our women, not only for the EM and for local people, is also because maybe the knowledge we have, maybe the culture, some consideration. But I want to raise, I'm sure that people may think that for safety, maybe you go to shelter first for your safety, so that people may ignore, or maybe some women do not want to corner their partner so harshly. So it's really related to our culture. It's need our hard working on the education. Yeah, that's my reflection.
I just am mindful of the time and note that we need to break for lunch. But also, I think what we're hearing is that there is a readiness to understand more, and a need. There's a recognition that there are gaps that need to be addressed. And one of the things that came through in the study, for example, was that social workers were saying, we don't have time. We're so hard worked. And it's true, right? You have so many cases. You have to put in the numbers. When do you do this? And I think
this is not an excuse.
It's not an excuse, absolutely not.
Not an excuse, yeah.
Well, I'm very pleased to hear that. And so if you have ideas, because you have knowledge about where your sharing happens the most, what are the appropriate platforms and avenues, and what is the level of receptivity, right? And I think these things can be arranged, but only in partnership. It can't be done top down. It has to be done as a partnership across different disciplines. So we're very open, and if you have ideas, please do put them forward. The last thing I just want to say before we close for the morning session is, I think we have to be careful when we talk about culture, because culture has this way of becoming the monster in the room, or having people sort of say, but why do we have to deal with it? And I think we have to recognize what we're talking about is culture in a very broad sense, in the way of lived experiences or realities. So sexuality and your other identities as a mother, as an immigrant, ethnicity is just a small part of it. So we're not talking about culture in the racial, ethnic sense. And I think it's really important to bear that in mind, because otherwise we will get dragged into this other discourse about multiculturalism and, why should the law look at culture? That's not what is being, what we're talking about at all. It's about mapping, capacities based on your identities and the fact that you are many people at one time, and how all of those identities affect your needs and your receptivity to different interventions to help victims and perpetrators. So I just want to put that out there on the table. Thank you to all our speakers. I'd like to invite you all to have lunch on the first floor podium level. Everyone is welcome. And then we'll reconvene back here at 2:10 to pick up. All right? Thank you once again.